Hello dear students, welcome to the lecture 6 of Responsive Web Design with ASP.NET 5 and MVC Pattern and Bootstrap 5. So today's topic is routing, and routing is one of the most important crucial part of MVC pattern in ASP.NET design. Also, I am a bit sick today, therefore I have a runny nose, and so my voice may not be very good. I am hoping that you will understand it and excuse me. So for today's lecture, I want to start with an empty project and continue from that empty project. So let's compose our new project. Meanwhile, we can read the introduction of routing.
Routing. Introduction. Routing in MVC is the concept of mapping a URL, which is what the end user will be requesting through their browser, to a method in one of your controllers, which will then send a response back to the browser. The response will often be a view, but it can also be a simple piece of text, a redirect, or a number of other options.
Okay, so you see that it is about visitor, a user, to requesting a URL and mapping that URL to a controller. So here, this is a routed URL. Why? Because it doesn't directly refer to a page, as you can see. It has some directorial setup, such as directory of routing and then introduction. So this is mapping to a page, a controller, if this page is designed in ASP.NET MVC. So this is what is about routing. So from here, we are going to ASP.NET Core empty. Or core. Okay, here ASP.NET Core Web App Model View Controller. Here, this is what we need. Okay, let's next and pick our directory. Next. Okay, let's continue.
Options. Default routing. If you're working on a brand new project, created from the empty template in Visual Studio, then your application doesn't have any routing yet. We talked a bit about routing in the article about adding a controller to the project, but if you haven't followed this tutorial from the start, we need to check up on this.
Okay, so we are selecting .NET Core 5, authentication none, configured for HTTPS. Okay, I will leave options as default. So you see it says it can be run on Linux, macOS, Windows Cloud, Service Web in C#. Let's continue.
Try opening your startup.cs file, which should have been added to your project when you created it. If there's nothing about routing, you need to add it manually.
So our project has started, but you see it is not empty because we have selected an existing project. I will compose an empty project, so it will be better for us to understand. Okay, let's delete the project here. Open. You see, you can also use project template that is generated by the ASP.NET. It includes many of the elements by default. However, for learning better, I will compose an empty project instead of a ready template. So let's reopen our Visual Studio. Okay, create new project. Looking for recent templates. We can continue.
Manually. The easiest way is to use the two helper methods called useRouting and mapDefaultControllerRoute. It adds a default, fallback, route to your project, which will try to map URLs to methods on one of your controllers. If no controller name is specified, the URL will be mapped to the home controller.
Okay, so this is about default routing, which we were using. So this is ASP.NET Web Core Model View Controller, but it is a template. What we need is empty project for. Okay, I think we need ASP.NET Core, not the. Yes, we need ASP.NET Core empty. Yeah, so this will be the thing that we are going to use. It will be an empty project, so we will generate everything ourselves. Okay, so it says that inside startup CS we are going to have a configuration like this. Okay, so yes, this is an empty project. Currently this does not support MVC pattern or anything, as you can see. So we are going to enable the MVC out of it. How we were doing it? Okay, so we have create host builder inside program CS. Yeah, it is already here. Okay, in program CS we don't change anything. So let's check for startup CS. We add services at MVC. This will turn our .NET Core application into an MVC application. It is added inside configure services. Yeah, the rest is same. Okay, so it tells us to add these, and let's see what does that do. It says that app use routing. It says add the Microsoft ASP.NET Core routing endpoint routing middleware to the specified application builder. Okay, so it will enable our routing, and as an endpoint we map the default controller. So when I run my application right now, what would happen? nothing would be displayed because we don't have the default view or controller. So we are going to add them as well. And how we were adding them? We were adding controllers and views, right? I will also add them, but I want to show you what happens when we run this application. Okay, you see nothing happens. So let's add our MVC pattern having folders. So first I will add controllers. You see you have to use exact naming as controllers, and inside controller I am going to add home controller. So it will be the default controller for home page of our view. Okay, I'm adding add MVC controller. You see it is by default. So default routing goes to home controller, and I also need a view because it is returning a view. However, this is not necessary because I can return message as well. Return content test. So I will just comment this out. Now our application should work because the default controller will map to home index action. Okay, I will show you in a minute. Let's run the application and I will explain you what I mean. Okay. Since we have set default controller in our startup CS here, it will map to default controller root. Okay, you see test is running. This is equal to home.index action. Okay, you see save. So this is the default controller routing home.index. Then we can add our view as well, our default view. So first we need to compose another folder as views. Okay, and here I am going to add another folder as home, and under this one I am going to add index because by default we are calling index view. In the previous lectures we have shown how to define different indexes, different names and everything, but just stick to our tutorial for now and index CSHTML. So when you call return view, it will look for by default, since we use default routing, it will look for views and home and index CSHTML. So this is equal to this one. Let me show you CSHTML and let's say whatever the message you want to show. So let's run the application to see. Okay, so here we are providing full path and here this is the default. Currently this will not run because we are returning here, but I just want to show you how it works. This returning view is not related to routing. We can return anything here, but home controller and index action is about default. Okay, it is working as expected. We can also run it like this.
Thanks to these methods, your application now supports basic routing. Here are some examples of URLs that now works and the controller/method combination that they map to.
Okay, so it works with the localhost works, home index works, test will work only if you have a test action in home controller, and home something will work. So let's also make them. Okay, we have seen that, but I will show again. So this time I will make a test and it will return test like this, something. Okay, so the something will return something. Okay, let's run and check each default routing mechanisms to understand. Routing is really crucial for you to understand. It is really important because how you define your website navigation totally depends on your routing. Okay, so this is equal to home.index. So now I can call home.test. It is working. I can call home.something working. Can I call like this? No, it is not working. Why? Because when you type something like that, it is expecting another input and it is not available. However, let's see if this will work. No. Here it says it will work, but it is not working. Yeah, this information is not valid anymore. You have to type home. So this is working, this is working, this is working, but this is not working anymore in the recent version.
But it doesn't just affect the home controller instead. It adds general support to access a method on a controller without having to create specific routes for it. So, if you have a controller called user controller, which has a method called details, you could access it by calling the following URL/user/details.
Okay, let's just compose a user details immediately and see. To do that, we are going to add a controller to our controller folder. Okay, so it will be user controller. You see, you have to add this to end of it so that the ASP.NET can understand that you are calling a controller. Inside view, I can add user controller. How am I going to do that? I am going to add folder as user, and here I will add as index, but I can add another thing as well. I will add details this time. Okay. Details page of user controller. So in user controller, I have to define this as details to call details, or alternatively, I can do something like this: index return view details. So both should work. Let's test it. These are all features of default routing in ASP.NET MVC. Okay, to access user home controller, I will have user.index. Okay, it is working. User.details, it is working as well. So you see, I can access it like this and this. So index is the action part here. If I type index, it will go into the index section. If I type details, it will go into the details. But in each case, it will go to the user controller because it is taking the controller name here by default routing. This is possible because we have added default routing. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible.
Details. In other words, the default route acts as a sort of catch-all rule to make it easy for you to get some basic pages up and running. But of course, this only works for you if all your content follows the same pattern / name of controller / name of method.
So you see, default routing acts such as catch-all rule. Therefore, if we follow name of controller / name of method, it will work. Here we are following that: name of controller user, name of method action details. We can see it. The name of method is index or details. That is how it works. That is how application understands it, because we are following the pattern. Okay.
Name of method. As soon as you deviate from this, e.g., because you don't want the specific name of your controller to appear in the URL, you will need to add your own rules. Don't worry, you can still rely on the default routing, simply by adding your own rules before the default routing is applied. More on that later.
Okay, so we can also add our rules, our routing rules, and we can still depend on the default routing. So how do we do that? We add our own rules before the default routing is applied. We will see that in the following pages.
Summary. Routing is the process of mapping URLs, which is how a user accesses a specific page or functionality in your application, to the controller and the method on that controller, which should be responsible for creating the response to the URL. Thanks to default routing, as we have seen in this article, you can get the most basic routing functionality very easy, but for more complex situations, you will need to create your own routes. No worries, we will talk much more about just that in the next articles.
Okay, so let's continue. Okay, the anatomy of MVC route. Let's start from here.
Routing. The anatomy of an MVC route. In this tutorial, we have already talked about how you can easily get up and running with basic routing support thanks to default routing. However, it's a great idea to understand just how routes are defined, because at one point, you will likely need to step outside the comfort of the default / catch-all route and create your own. With that in mind, let's talk a bit about how a route is defined and what it looks like. The most important part of a routing rule is to translate a URL into a controller method.
Okay, so the most important part is translating URL into a controller. So when we type this URL, it has to be translated into a controller method so that the ASP.NET Engine can return you the proper content. So it is about translation of addresses to the method.
Method. For that, we need the URL path and the name of the controller and the method. The system needs to be able to identify the rule, and you might also like a reminder about the purpose of the rule, if you have a lot of them, so we also need to give the rule a name.
Okay, so what we need is, we need to compose a rule that will also have a name to identify the rule later, and that rule will translate the URL into a controller and the method of that controller. Okay.
With that in mind, let's try creating a very basic rule. As mentioned, rules can be defined in several ways and places, but we'll start out doing it in the startup.cs file, inside the configure method.
Okay, so this is how we can do it inside startup.cs configure method. Okay, startup is here, configure is here. Okay, it says use routing, and here use MVC route. So it says that if we use endpoints, then we can't use MVC. Okay, let's remove this. I have to remove this as well inside configure services. Okay, so what we need is, we need to set, telling us MVC options enable endpoint routing. MVC, where is MVC options? Continue using use MVC preset MVC options and enable. Okay, you see, after I have clicked the error message, it has opened the page and I'm going to edit. Oh, I see. So instead of this, I will use this and let's see how will it work. So I will add this before my default routing, and here I will add a custom route such as custom route name. So it will take product list and the controller will be home instead of product, and action will be index. Okay, so let's see what happens. It works or not. You see, this is the pattern we have defined. However, it will call home controller with index action instead of products controller with list action. Okay, default routing looks like working. Let's test it. Home index working. What else we have? We have user index working, details working. Let's say yes. And now time to check our custom route, which takes products and then list. Yes, it is also working. So you see, this is how we add a custom route as we want. I can make this whatever as I want. For example, if I make it like this, let's see, just products. I don't want to put anything end of it or extension. Okay, products. Yes, it is also working. Nice. You see, we can define it as we want. I can also make it as something home, or let's say index. Okay, just index. And when I run it, we will see. Oh, 1 minute. Maybe we can define them in single row like this. Oh, it has to be like this. I see. Yes. Okay. So what parameter it takes? Oh, maybe like this. I am trying to add multiple options to the route. Let's try like this. Or can we chain it? Maybe we can chain. I am trying to chain so that it can work. Yeah, let's try like this. So I have chained map route like this. I don't know if this is the proper way, but can find it later. Okay, something in error. It says an item with the same key. Yeah, because we have used this one, therefore we have to give another name. Okay, let's say index route. Now it should work. You see, it depends on the keys that you add. Name of the route is really important so that it can keep track of that. I think we can also each time define app use MVC. Okay, it is working. So let's try index. Yes, it is working. So this is working. However, it doesn't look very well. So maybe we can define it for each one like this as well. I'm not sure. Let's compose another one. And this. You see, this works and this is also working. Yes, each one is working. Let's continue with the tutorial. Alright, so with this approach, we are able to define our custom routings as well as keeping our default routing as well.
The call to map route takes several parameters. In this case, we supply a name for the route, the first parameter, the URL template for the rule, the second parameter, as well as an object of defaults, the third parameter, which will direct the rule to the desired controller and method on that controller. So, with this in place, we can now call the URL http://localhost/products/list, and the list method on the products controller will be called the route template. In the above example, the most interesting parameter is the second one. It defines the template of the route, and while our template was very simple, there are a lot more possibilities, allowing you to support very sophisticated and complex URLs. First of all, you can define the default controller and method/action directly in the template like this. Routes.maproute default controller equals home /action equals index. This is generally referred to as conventional routing because it consists of at least two parts, where the first part refers to the controller method and the second part refers to the action/method. The third and optional part is usually an ID, allowing you to refer to a specific entity you would like to display, e.g. a specific product instead of a list of products, and so on. You can define this optional ID parameter in the route as well, using a special syntax. Let's try a more complex example of a route, where we use several of the techniques just described.
Okay, so we can also add an optional ID, and how it is optional? It is optional because you see there is a question mark at the end. So let's define this such as like this. Okay, so when we define it like this, it will pass also ID parameter to the home action index. Here, let's add another method which will return something like this. It will be integer ID and pass it. Let's name it as parameter pass action, and yes, it will just call this action. Okay, all right, let's start and see. The first one is key, the other one is the URL syntax, parse here is defining which controller and the action it will take. Okay. So when we provide no ID, let's see what happens. Okay, passed ID is 0, and when we define like this, yes, it is working. You see, I have added ID to the end of the URL and now it works. I could also do it something like this, I believe. Yes. You see, this is not SAO type of URL. So if you want to apply SAO techniques to your website, you can make it something like this. So this looks much better than this, as you would also agree. Okay. With this way, you can get indexed each one of your products with different pages. However, if you apply this, they may not get all indexed. Probably they would, but this is not SEO friendly. This is SEO friendly, as you can see. This is the difference. All right.
The template now matches URLs which starts with the word products. If nothing else is specified, it will default to the index action/method. On the other hand, if an action is specified in the second part of the URL, it will be used. At the end, we have an optional ID parameter. The fact that it's optional is noted with the use of a question mark. We now support the following URLs: /products/ /products/list/ /products/details/32/
Okay, so here you see details method, there is list method, the default index method. So each one of them is being supported. Okay, in our case, we also support them. Okay, let's come here.
Notice especially the details methods. It has a parameter called ID, which matches the parameter we specified in the root. This means that if you call the details URL, the ID you append to it will automatically be passed as the ID parameter to the details method. As you can see, the routing template system is very flexible and allows you to support many different URL variations. There are many more possibilities, which we'll look into later in this tutorial, but hopefully these examples have given you a good idea on just how powerful the routing mechanisms in ASP.NET Core MVC is.
We can also type the action name like here instead of writing here. Both is possible. You see, we also define action here, or we can define the action here as well.
Multiple routes. As previously mentioned, you can of course have more than one route in your application. In fact, the most common approach is to have a default /catch-all route, as we saw in the previous article, but keep it in the bottom of the list of routes. Why? Because the routing rules are processed from the top and down, until a match is found. When a match occurs, no more routes are processed. In other words, you should have your most specific rules at the top, and then keep the less specific /catch-all routes at the bottom. It could look like this.
Okay, so it is important that the rules are processed from top to bottom, from the edit order. Therefore, if we want one rule to be processed earlier, we have to put it to the top. Okay, and if that rule matches, no more rules will be checked. If that rule does not match, it will continue to bottom to search until it finds a route. That is important. If we add, you see currently it is looking for parameter pass. However, if I add another rule here and another one too, and instead of action parameter pass, I will use index. Now this route will be used first because it is added first. Let's test it. So this one will not be used, and then I will add ID. You see, it is being used, not the other one is being used. So this one is being used first. Say when a URL such as explanation is pretty obvious. Okay, so here it is showing the same thing.
Notice how I have a very specific rule first for products, and then the default catch-all rule in the end. It makes sure that even if you haven't defined a specific route to a controller/action combination, it will try to reach it if it exists. If it doesn't exist, it will fall back to the index method on the home controller.
Okay, we also used the default routing here. So we have combined it with app use MVC and app use routing. How did we do it? We did do it with options enabled endpoint routing false. So now both is working. Both endpoints and default is being used.
Summary. By now, you should have a much better idea about how routing works and how to define your own routes. During the next articles, we will look into more available options you have when defining your routes, as well as other ways of using the routing mechanisms of ASP.NET MVC.
Alright, let's continue.
Routing. Attribute routing. In the previous article, we discussed what a route is, how it works, and how you can define roots in the startup.cs files. This is how roots are defined in a lot of projects, but there is an alternative. ASP.NET MVC allows you to define a root directly on the responsible controller and or specifically for the responsible action/method. This is often called attribute routing because you use attributes to define the root for the method. Allow me to illustrate with an example.
It is possible to define attributes such as this one to define routing. So this is, yes, let's try it. For test, I will define an attribute routing. So to attribute, it starts with square bracket, then it gets route, which is a special method you see. And inside route, it takes the path. Okay, path of the route. You see string template, properties name, order. Okay, so the template may be null. I will make the test as test2. Okay, let's try it and see if test2 is going to test. Okay, however, which one is first being processed? I think we also test it. Okay, and then test2. Yes, it is working. However, if we add another root to our startup CS, let's see what happens. So I will define a test version 2. It will be test 2, same, but it will go to this one. Let's see what happens now. So this one and that one here is conflicting. So which root will be used? Okay, it will use the first matching one. Therefore, I am assuming one that we have defined in the startup CS will be used. Oh no. The one here is being used. Okay, so first it is checking the controller root, looks like. Not the one we defined in startup CS, because it would call another one if it was using this one. Okay, let's see. Let's continue.
Pay attention to the very first line of the example, where I use the root attribute method to define a routing template for this controller. You will notice that my controller uses the word product in the singular form, but I would like to use the plural form for the URLs. I can accomplish just that by defining this word as the routing template for the controller with that in place. I can now access URLs like /products/ or /products, since they will just default to our index method. That was very basic and only works because it automatically falls back to the index method, but attribute routing allows for much more complicated use cases as well. For instance, our controller could also be used to serve a single product instead of the general index/overview. Let's add a method for that and define an access route for it at the same time.
Okay, so there is route at the top of the class. There is route optional ID, parameter ID. Okay, this looks much better. So to test it, I will add another one. Let's add a controller as attribute routing. Here I will add another view. It can be anything basically. So I will just add a view here. So we will go out of the default template attributes, okay, whatever we want, and here okay, attributes CS HTML, and you see this is not under any proper directory, therefore I will return a full path like this. This is under views, of course, and here I will define a root. Will be, let's say this one will be okay, item. You see, not related to attribute or anything, it is just items. Oh, we have to put slash here. By the way, I will make it, yeah. Here, I will add an ID parameter, but yeah, let's also add a model to our model, our view models, and add a class as product. Okay, you see, I am using all different names, but if you use them properly with the proper names, it should still work. I will have a public integer, let's say item ID, okay, and here I will take another route as parameters such as, let's say, okay, product ID, and it will be same as here. Okay, one moment. It will be integer in product ID. I will define a models dot product. Okay, my product equal to product, and my product dot item ID will be equal to product ID. And I will also return my model, okay, like this. And inside our view, which is attributes here, I will define my model equal to models dot, okay, one more, like chicks models dot product. And now I can use attributes HTML and pass it item ID will be equal to its model. But this model has bigger one more here, item. You see, when we define our model, we use smaller uppercase first letter, and when we access model with uppercase, And let's run our application to see how it is working. So for attribute routing controller, we have defined the main route as items, and then it will get product ID route like this. So, okay, let's try items with bigger item. Okay, it is not working because it is expecting also action name. However, when we type like this, it is working. Why? Because now instead of the action name, it is able to understand this optional parameter routing. By the way, it works with items, but it works with items as well. Yes, so both uppercase and lowercase is working with the passed parameter. Even if you do something like this works. If we do something like this, still work, and like this, not working. So for this to work, we need to provide product ID equal to, oh, product still not working. Yeah, so we have to use it something like this. So this is working. Okay, let's add a comment here. However, if we define same thing, okay, like this, then what happens? Usually both are product ID. I am assuming that the first one will be called, but it may also throw an error. See what happens. Okay, items to. Yes, we have an error. It says that multiple actions match it. Following action matched route data and had all constraints satisfied. If you make like this, you get an error on the runtime. How can we fix it? We can fix it with additional requirement, I think, such as perhaps like this. Let's put an A to the beginning. I wonder if it will work. You see, if you want to learn how does the system work, you have to make experiment. Okay, items A.32. Yes, now it is working. Now it is going to this one. You see how it is easy to use, it is convenient to use.
Notice how I have added a root attribute to the details method. It uses a special syntax for defining variable content, where we surround the name of the parameter with a set of curly braces. We will discuss this more in depth later in this chapter, but for now, just be aware that it allows us to specify a parameter which will be passed to the responding method. What it means in this case is that we could now load the product with the ID passed through the URL and display it to the user. In the example, we just print the ID though, to keep things simple. Our controller now supports URLs like this one /products/42 and /products/84/, so the last slash is optional. Please notice that I only use the last part of the URL in the root template, the ID, because the controller already specifies that it should be called with the word products first. If that wasn't the case, we would have to define the entire URL for this specific method instead, like this.
Okay, why we don't put the products in the beginning is because we have defined the default here. Therefore, I didn't have to put items here. When we go to items now directory, it will go to this class, this controller. And everything, every method inside this will take this by default. It's how it is. So these items is coming from here.
So, whether you define it partially for the controller and partially for the method, or specify it all on each method, is really up to you and the situation.
Okay, let's try another one, another case, and show you how it works. So I will call this as B, but I will provide a full path, okay, such as items. And it will 3, and this time I will divide it by 5. And let's try it. This should also work because now we are providing full path. Items B100 working. Let's see which method action is being called. Oh, the first one. Why? Because this catches everything that doesn't match the path. I think I know the reason. Because I have to put another slash here. Now it won't catch it. You see, we have just learned something else as well. So this slash means that it will go to the root of the website of the URL, which is this one in this case, and it is already supporting HTTPS. Is we allowed to B100. Yes, now it is working. Okay, so this is kind of catch-all rule. All right, now we understand how it works.
Situation. It could be useful to define it all on each method if your controller should support more than one entrance URL, but in most situations, you could probably save a few keystrokes by defining a common entrance for the controller and then the rest for each method. For some situations, you may want a method to have more than one route. This is easily accomplished because you can define as many as you want. You can even mix and match URLs partially and completely defined on the specific method like this.
Okay, this is another great thing. Let me show you. Let's add another one for whatever the name we want. It doesn't matter because we are using routing, and here I will define three cases. And so let's provide full path product and optional parameter product ID. Okay. And define another path as item product ID. So both should work. This time I will return to multiplication of 3 times. Okay, let's try. So we have defined two different routings. As you can see, these two are different. I will add them as a command to do here in a moment. So let's try the first one, items and then product and then 32. Okay, it is working. And another one will be as item product. Oh, it didn't work. Oh, it should work. Well, I know the reason, because we have to still have items path. Okay, this also. You see, these are different items product, items item, and both is displaying the same.
With that in place, our product details page can now be accessed using URLs with both the singular and the plural form of the word product. This specific result could be accomplished in other ways, with a more flexible route, but it serves as a nice demonstration of how easy it is to define multiple routes. Summary: attribute routing can be a great alternative to the conventional way of defining routes in your project. Because they are defined directly on the controller, it can be easier to understand which routes are valid for a given controller and method. On the other hand, there are a few limitations when using attribute routing when it comes to routing constraints, but for most situations, this shouldn't be a problem. If you run into these limitations anyway, remember that you are free to combine conventional routing with attribute routing. So, at the end of the day, whether to use attribute routing or not comes down to personal taste and the requirements of the project you are working on.
So let's compare them.
Introduction: routing is the first and foremost phenomenon in the ASP.NET MVC pipeline. Here, you will learn about routing, how it works, and its variants. Background: last week one of my friends asked this question: can we make our custom route with some constraints, and what is attribute routing? I am dedicating this article to him. I hope he will like this. The topics to be covered are routing and how it works, parts of a route, default route and custom route. What is the purpose ignore route method? How to apply constraints to custom route? What is attribute routing? Default and optional parameter, default action and route prefix, name and order property. Attribute routing including constraints. Routing. Routing is the first step in ASP.NET MVC pipeline. This is the replacement of the concrete, physical files used in the In other words, routing is the phenomenon in which controller and actions execute rather than the concrete physical files. Why do we need routing? Traditionally, the URL of the browser represents the physical file. A file can be HTML file, ASPX page, etc. Let's understand this traditional way. www.abcd.com/images/john.aspx?id=2. This URL shows that first we go to images folder, then access the john.aspx file having ID is 2.
This is the traditional way. It goes to this directory, then inside it goes to john.aspx file with the additional parameter ID equal to
2. Hence it is not the good way to expose your precious information to the URLs of the browser. So with these URL sites can be hacked. As a result, routing comes into action and solves this problem of the traditional file-based system. Implementation of routing starts with route table. The route table is a collection of all possible, correct routes that can be used to map the HTTP request URLs. Let's understand route table and the working of routing in detail. Routing is a pattern matching system that matches the incoming request to the registered URL patterns reside in the route table. When an ASP.NET MVC application starts, it registers patterns to the route table to tell the routing engine to give a response to the requests that match these patterns. An application has only one route table, and it resides in the application_start event of global.asax of the application. The routes are registered to the route config class that has the route URLs to be mapped and ignored in the application. Let's have a look at it. Public class route.
Okay, here you see they have added resources.axtx to be ignored in routing, because this is usually files provided by ASP.NET, and here the default and whatever it is, and global ASX. We don't have global ASX because our application is MVC.NET Core, not .NET Framework. In .NET Framework we have global ACX, but here we don't have it. But the routing probably looks in the same way.
What is attribute routing? Attribute routing is the new type of routing in ASP.NET MVC 5. According to the name attribute routing, one can suppose that this type of methodology will use attribute to define routes. Yes. Let's understand it in detail. Why do we need attribute routing? First of all, look at our previous custom route. Public.
Okay, so each time they write routes map route, see, we have seen this already. Okay, so this is kind of older code.
In the above code there are only two routes defined with the help of MapRoute. But when our application is large enough to have more than two routes, then it will become very complex to make each route separately. For each route, you have to write 5 lines, so it will consume your time and disturb your development time. You have to take care of the URL pattern in route config class, as well as in controller where your request will be handled. So this to and fro movement in between these folders creates complexity for you. It will reduce the chances of errors because in route config class there can be any mistake while creating a new custom route. It is easy to use and help in mapping the same action method with two routes. You don't have to take care of the routing flow I.E. from most specific to most general. All here is the attribute you use the action method. Now let's move to use attribute routing. First of all, you have to enable the access to attribute routing. So route config class becomes.
Okay, our application already has that feature. Okay, so this is the way we can also define default parameter like this, and there is route prefix. Okay, oh, there is also route order. I think you will see that.
Routing templates. So far, the routes we have used have been very basic a static path, sometimes combined with a simple, variable parameter. However, the routing system in ASP.NET MVC has a lot more to offer. You can in fact create very advanced URL routes, using route templates. We'll look into some of the possibilities in this article. In a previous article we used the ID syntax to map a part of the URL to a parameter called ID in the receiving controller method. This is one of the most basic routing templates you can use, but you are not limited to using just one variable / parameter in your routes. In fact, you can use as many as you want, and you are free to combine them in any way you see fit. This could, for example, be used to create a URL with both an ID and a slug, as seen in many blog systems like WordPress, etc. Here's an example of a routing template where we combine two parameters to create the classical ID / URL_slug URL.
Okay, let's define this. So I will copy and paste the code. You see, it will use block as a route. However, I want to make it the route by block, not the items. Therefore, I define full path as like this, and enter ID and slug. So in my model, which is here, attribute products model, I am going to add a slug parameter as well. Okay, define it as property. Okay, let's say slug. Okay, and then we will return not a content but product to our view. Here, actual entry ID will be ID, and the slug will be equal to slug. Yeah, now it should work on our attribute CSHTML. I will put some HR, some BR on, and then let's say block ID equal to model dot item ID. The slug will be equal to model dot slug, and let's run the application. So you see, we are able to set a routing path that is completely irrelevant to our class names, method names, action names, whatever. It's totally possible. I could also set this in Startup CS, but I think it is better to set it here, because when you check the method, you can directly see what kind of path it will be using. And here I will set it as block. Entry ID, let's say 500, and the slug, let's say routing is great in ASP.NET. You see, it is working as expected. Block ID 500, block slug is routing is great in ASP.NET. I think I can also put an ending slash here. Yes, still working. So either way is working as expected. You see, it says you can now reach this action using URL like this. So basically, what does DCT is using is, it has registering routing templates and the routing to an ID of the article. So when this routing templates comes, it reads that parameter and finds the ID of this article in the database, and then it returns that article to our screen.
153 will then be mapped to the entry ID parameter, while testing ASP MVC routes will be mapped to the slug parameter, and based on that, the following output will be generated by our action method.
So you see, it doesn't have to be an ID. This can be also mapped to the ID of article. How can that be done? Let's assume that we have a database. Okay, I will show you what does that mean. Let's say we have database class. Currently, I won't be using real database. It's a later thing. Let's say article, or let's call it as DB. Okay, DB class. It is in our entire folder like this. I will make it public static. And here I will have a public dictionary. It will have string and string. Okay. I will name it as dictionary article. So I will also have a static constructor DB. This is the constructor of DB class. What this constructor is going to do is it will compose a new dictionary. Then I will add the article. So the articles will be added. By the way, I will make this as a tuple, actually, not a string. Tuple, string, string. Okay, let's add this as an article. Okay, so how it is going to work is simply, let's get the page source of this page here, how we can return it. I will add it to a view such as add view. So let's name it as routing HTML. Yeah, it should work. Routing HTML. I am adding in source code to this page. I am going to add this as a with new key value. So it will be new tuple. It will take item 1. Item 1 will be routing. Item 2 will be routing templates. And the content, the value will be routing HTML. Then I'm going to have a public static return content method. It will take string sr key 1, key 2, and it will return dictionary articles. It will return the article name. So we can make this private as well. So if compose the key as tuple, key equal to new tuple 2, and if dictionary articles contain key, we are key, it will return articles, we are key, else we will return null. And simply we will call this method in our controller. Okay, so this is our type. I'm going to use this, or let's change it a bit, entry, and it will use entry, or let's say it will have entry ID and slug or whatever. It can be key 1 and key 2, whatever we want. So by the way, they just need to match here. Okay, so it will be string string, and we will get var key equal, or let's say value equal to, our class name is db dot return content key 1 key 2, and if string is null or empty, we are value, we will return content no such article is found. Okay, else we are going to return view. The view full path will be, it is under views folder, simply like this. We will append the value and nothing else. Okay, so let's try it. So article key 1, key 2, we will have it. You can imagine this same thing in your database design with the input parameters such as this one. Then you can check the article in the database and return it. Okay, so it will be article 1 and 1. You see no such article is found. Then let's use our keys, which are routing. Okay, first key will be routing, and the second key will be routing template. Okay. By the way, you cannot allow flash character in your keys. You can break your application. Okay, as you can see, this is the way that you can bring any article you want in your database. Okay, so I have noticed something while checking the reason why routing CSHTML might not working. So here, there is something, as you can see, build action. You see, it is none. But when we check the other added things, you see build action content. This is a really important part in the configuration. So I'm going to make this as a content as well. And now let's add another option here to our database dictionary as routing route v2. And this will go to routing article here. And now let's retry. By the way, for this to be seen as Razor page from IntelliSense, we have to restart the application. Closing and opening this page might help, but I'm not sure. Yes, closing and opening that page also refreshed the cache. And now we can see this page as a Razor page as well. And now, let's see. And now it is working as expected.
Catch all parameters. If you test the above route, you will notice that your slug can't contain forward slashes, / like this one. /blog/153 testing the /routing system /. The reason is probably obvious. The / is normally used in URLs to separate folder names, and even though your route doesn't necessarily relate to a specific folder, the / still has a special meaning. In this case, it would seem that you are trying to reach either two folders or two parameters with the values testing the and routing system. This might not be what you want, though perhaps in your system, it makes sense to allow forward slashes as part of the URL slug. For situations like this, ASP.NET MVC includes the so-called catch-all parameters. A catch-all parameter is created by prefixing the name of the parameter with an asterisk character like this.
Okay, so we can also use asterisk character to catch all. Okay, and in that case, we would be able to use even this special character as well. Okay, let's make an example. This will be the second example. I will add something like this. Okay, after adding that, I should be able to add whatever I want to the end of the URL. Let's test it. Let's try. Oh, yeah, now we are getting an error. I see. So this is not the format. I think we have to make it like this. Let's retry. Oh, now it says we have character marks. Okay, so this is also not allowed. So I think we need to make this as like this. So it will allow everything as to. Yes, so this is probably the correct way. To show how it works, let's add another value here to our database. I will add something like this, routing v2. Now let's retry. This is a forward slash, therefore normally it is not accepted. However, since we have added a asterisk character, now it should work. Let's try. Okay, it's working. Let's try older one, routing v2. Okay, working as expected, and let's add another slash. Yes, so you see with asterisk character, now everything that comes after this slash is considered as a string, not a special URL. So this is how you handle the URLs into the methods, how you convert them. This is all about power of routing.
Optional parameters. In the examples above, both the entry ID and the slug parameters were required if omitted in the URL. The root template would simply not match the requested URL, and the result will be either a 404 page not found, or it would be caught by the default /fallback route. However, sometimes you want to make one or several parameters optional, meaning that they can be omitted without the root failing to match the URL request. For instance, you may decide that the URL slug for your blog post should be optional after all. The ID is enough to identify the desired blog post and display it to the user, while the slug part is often included for SEO/readability reasons. Making the slug part of the URL optional is as simple as adding a question mark to the parameter name. Root blog/.
Okay, so in this case, our tuples would change. It would become something like this, an empty string. So let's also add that to our routing. In our routing here, I will add another root. By the way, it may also cause a problem with this one. They may conflict, but I am not sure. Okay, so we will test it. If they will conflict or not, I am not sure. We have made it both. It can be anything or it is optional. Okay, so yes, working. Yes, or again working. So optional is also working. So we can also use this, I believe. Try. Okay, it says article is not found. Probably it is because it is getting a null as a this I have changed it. So this string key2 is being null probably. I'm not sure, but let's test it. Yeah, it is null. Therefore, I have to change it here. How? Simply, can we add this as a null? Yeah, it is working. Nice. Try. Okay, and okay. Okay, working. So this is both is working. So they are not conflicting because since in the second way we don't have, but if we add this, still working. And let's see why. So the key2 is still being null. Okay, so both is working. However, if we even add a character here, then it will become like this. As expected, is working. All right, and let's continue.
If you do so, the slug parameter will be null. This is not a problem when using it for output the way we do, but if you tried using the value for other purposes, it could result in a null reference exception. To remedy this, you should either check for null before using it, or, if it makes more sense in your case, add a default string value to the parameter, empty or non-empty, like this.
So this is an empty default string.
Reserved routing names. When creating your routes and specifying, for instance, parameter names, you should pay attention to the following words, which are reserved within the routing system and therefore shouldn't be used as names/parameter names. Action, area, controller, handler, page.
So what does this mean? This simply means this. Let me show you. So when we define parameter names like here, we can't use these special keywords such as action. Okay, so if you define something like this, it will throw an error. Try if you want. By the way, these and these would conflict. Let's change this to article 2 and let's try. And or area controller, all of these are prohibited keywords. Oh, it has already thrown an error. You see, cannot contain parameter named action. This is great. This is why .NET is great, because you see, you immediately see the error. This is how it is strong typed programming language. Whenever it is possible, the .NET framework warns you about errors. It didn't throw any error at the compile time, but immediately at the runtime we get an error. And so we can fix our error immediately. Okay, these words are not allowed as parameter names such as below. Okay, so this will not working.
Summary. As you can see, URL routing is very flexible when using the template functionality illustrated in this article. However, sometimes a route can become too flexible, meaning that it might conflict with other routes in your website. For these situations, among others, you need to take more control of your routes. This can be achieved with routing constraints, which we'll discuss in the next article. Routing constraints. In the previous articles of this chapter, we saw how we could create very flexible and thereby broad matching route templates to catch many different kind of URL structures and map them correctly. However, at some point, your routes may become matched too broadly, or perhaps you just have a very specific structure that you want to enforce. For this, ASP.NET MVC has introduced the clever concept of route constraints, allowing you to be much more specific when defining the parameters of your routes. To illustrate how routing constraints can help, let's take a look at the example from the previous article, where we created a route for handling a classic ID/URL slug scenario. Route blog/entry ID/slug public IAction result blog.
Okay, let's.
There are several types of route constraints, so let's use this example to see how they all work. Data type constraints. In this case, we use an integer for the entry ID parameter, so we might as well enforce that directly in the template, using the special route constraint syntax.
Okay, so with these constraints, strings would not get catch by this action. Let's simply illustrate that. Okay, k is 1 and it will take string k1 and 2. I will add a routing such as cons key1 key2. Let's return content key1 key1 and 2. And now I will use the same k2. However, it will be this time integer, so it will be int and this will be k2. You see, it is using almost exactly the same. However, one of them constraint integer, the other one constraint no constraints. So let's see. I'm not sure, maybe we need to put here string constraint, but let's see it and how it works. Okay, so this is case 1 and let's try this. Case 2, okay, it is working as expected. You see, when this is integer, it goes to case 2. When it is not integer, okay, such as this, it goes to case 1. Okay.
The difference can be found in the where I have added int like this, entry ID, int. Now the URL will only match the route if the entry ID parameter is an integer like this. /blog/153/testing the system/. URLs like this one will no longer match. /blog/abc153def/testing the system/. Data type constraint types.
So which constraint types there are? Here the full list. Let's add to our page such as this. So we can make boolean, datetime, double, float, decimal, for example. Let's apply one of them. Okay, such long and integer may get problematic. However, I think boolean should work. Case 3, try. So let's try true. Yes, now goes to case 3. Okay, or false. If we set it as 0, it is working as okay. Okay, let's continue.
Length/range constraints. Another type of route constraints will help you enforce a certain minimum and or maximum length for strings, or a minimum/maximum value for numeric types. We could use that to make our route template from before even more specific. For instance, since the entry ID should likely match a database entry, we could argue that the value should be higher than 0. We can use the min constraint to do that. Route blog/int.
Okay, so let's try this. Okay, I'm going to use this time cons 2. Okay, and min. Yeah, minimum 1. So this case 4, maximum 1, case 5. I wonder if this will be inclusive or exclusive, min max. Okay, let's try. So we have two different cases, minimum and maximum. And according to that, case will change. So this is case 5. We said it min 1. Okay. So you see, these are overlapping cases. Therefore, it did output case 4. We set it 0, it is still case 5. If we set it 2, it is case 4. Okay, so if we have overlapping cases, what happens if we change this? I wonder. Cons. Okay, it is going case 1. Okay, so you see the first case that it enters working. So the first case it enters is case 2. That is when the constraint order comes into kicking. I mean the routing order. So let's also see it. I think it was somewhere here. Order. Yeah, we can also define routing order. In this case, how do we define it? Order, yeah. So maybe here. Yes, order 1. Okay. So I will make this higher order. Okay, order 2, order 3, order 4. So if there are multiple cases where it satisfies the conditions, you can define order and based it on that order it will work. Okay, there are also other constraints such as range, min length, minimum length, maximum length, even regular expressions such as this one. So if it matches, it will get into that. However, I wouldn't suggest you to use regular expression unless you need it extremely. Okay, so let's now retest our order. Cons 1, 1. Okay, case 4. You see, this time it is getting into case 4. Why? Because the case 4 has minimum 1 with order 1. It would also satisfy case 5, but the case 5 has order 2. Therefore, this is where it is captured. So when I set this as 2, it is case 4, or 0, it is still case 4, because I have to change this. Now it is case 5. So are there any possibility that I can enter case 1 or case 2 in this case? So now I cannot enter inside case 2, but I can enter inside case 1. How? If I change this to a non-integer, it can work like this. Okay, let's also type the other constraints. Okay, I will just add them as a note because it is just basically same, is different. So there is range, you have min length. You can also combine multiple constraints such as this one. This one combines range and min and max length. Like this, here is the combination. This is the combination of integer range, both integer and range. Okay, you can also have regular expression constraints such as this one. Okay, so let's add this page. And I wonder if there are any other constraints. Let's see. Okay, route constraints. Okay, so this is written in 2013. So this is a regular expression constraint, I would say. Maybe some more decent page, decently written page. So this is optional ID parameter, ID integer, alpha. Interesting. What is alpha? So alpha is a class, custom class, or what? Okay, there is also root areas. Root area is nothing but way to specify the area in a root, basically just to let you the root know that the control belongs to some area. Root area, root prefix. Oh, alpha is this one. Which is uppercase or lowercase in Latin. Okay, so the attributes are fully written here, and let's write them here. Okay, I think it is a good source. So you can use any of these constraints like this. So there is alpha, bool, datetime, decimal, double, float, QID, integer length, long, max length, min length, range, regex. Okay, for today it is enough. I am sorry that I was a bit sick. Therefore, I have a running nose. Therefore, I had to pause the video a lot during the lectures, but I didn't want to delay back. So let's take our context note as well. Okay, in lecture 6, what we have done, how to compose an empty from scratch .NET Core web application without any templates. Okay. How to convert an empty core web application into application. Okay, how did we convert it? We have added startup file services at MVC. How to support both custom routing and default endpoint routing in application. What does let's see, web application. We can also write this as well. Use the titles here. The anatomy of MVC route templates, multiple routes to the same controller. Attribute routing. Okay. Advantages of attribute routing. Routing templates catch all parameters and optional parameters. Okay, reversed routing names. This is also important. If you use them, you will get an runtime error. Okay, routing constraints. Okay, I think it is enough. So let's upload our source code. Okay, lecture 6. Okay, it is uploaded. Hopefully see you next week.